Hi, Tom here. Hey, today we're talking lesson two under annual budgets. When we did our first lesson, we talked about why doing a budget is so important. Why do we need to do that? Well, today we're going to build on that. And we're going to work on lesson two on the essentials of building a well balanced budget. And there's different components of the budget and how you do and put together the budget that are essential for making sure the budget works and is balanced for you all the way through the year. Lesson two, key components. So there's a number of different things that we're going to talk about today, but really what I want to walk through is how do you build a strong and well crafted budget that is balanced throughout the year. And so when we take a look at setting a budget, that's going to last us for 12 months. So we want to make sure that we're well thought out. We have all the components, all the information that we need to create that budget. So as we look at the revenue aspects, realistic versus just optimistic, and I think well, many of us are optimistic. And so you're looking at how you put together a budget, and you got to be realistic. So for me, the first piece is starting with historical data. We're going to factor in those seasonal trends and look for other things that have happened. So, you landed a large customer in the month of July last year, and it was a huge, big win that month. Well, is that going to happen again this coming July? Maybe, maybe not. There are other aspects that come into play, whether it was a seasonal change, or it was a hurricane, there was a fire, there was a some kind of weather event, or something else that affected the business in some fashion. So taking those trends into account will help us. We're going to overestimate when we're not looking at what the evidence that supports it. So we want to think that we're going to grow by 20%. Great. But if we don't have good evidence to support that, then it's just a guess. And again, as we've talked in the first lesson, we don't want to overestimate. We want to keep things in track that make sure that it's a reachable, not a stressful budget. We want to stretch ourselves. We want to get to getting to that next goal. But if we overestimate, then we're just going to be under pressure all year. Creating multiple scenarios. Now, for me, a conservative approach, an expected and aggressive approach, these are all different things. And we've kind of talked about the stressful aspect of putting together a very aggressive budget. And sometimes that's good. But I think what we want to be able to focus in on is really the expected aspect of the budget. There are things that are going to change, but we want to try to keep and look at all the different scenarios that make sense. And lastly, we want to align these budgets to goals that make sense for the operation. Projection estimates. Now, some of this is, I think for me, is looking at it from a kind of an infographics helpful for me. It kind of helps lay it out. So as I think about this from a revenue, we're going to start on the left-hand side of the column here under the revenue estimate. There's three key components that I've always looked at when I'm putting together budgets. What's the historical data taught us? What are the market trends? And what's the customer forecast? Each of these have different components. Under the historical aspect, that's going to be data that's just real data that you have that talks about years prior, months prior. So again, we talked about July last year versus July this year. Well, what's the historical information? So we want to be able to take a look at historical sales estimates. We want to take a look at the market trends. Is there an enhancement into the market? Has something changed within the industry that we work with or the market that we service that's going to allow us to look at different trends that are going to either be positive or negative? And then the last aspect is customer forecasting. And I think this is the one thing that gets missed most often is talking to some of your customers. There are oftentimes the 80-20 rule applies. 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of our customers. Well, let's not always, but that's oftentimes the case. So let's talk to those customers. Let's get some insight. Are they going to have more demand this year or less demand? Are things changing? Are they moving locations? Are they expanding? Those are aspects that will really help us to put together a really strong revenue estimate. On the right-hand side of this sheet, you'll notice that there's revenue protection comparisons. So what I've done is I've just kind of laid out some different aspects, conservative, expected, aggressive, and laid it out by quarter. And so you'll notice that there's different aspects that would be related to this that helps us to make a good estimate as we're starting to put together a well-balanced budget, not just being optimistic. We want the data to help us focus in on that. Look at how we're trying to put together this budget. The budget itself is a collaboration of information from people across your organization. It's a collaboration of information. It's a consolidation of data that helps to support what we're trying to put together in this forecast. And again, remember, this is a year-long forecast. So if we take the time up front, like we talked about in lesson 1, take a minute to think prevents hours of trouble. Take that time to create a forecast that is really based upon historical, customer feedback, and market trends. So fixed versus variable cost. So we're going to walk through this. So from a fixed cost standpoint, these are fixed costs like salaries. These are salary paid positions, not hourly paid positions, because hourly you can go up and down, ebb and flow with the cost of business. But if you have a base salaried employees, these are salaries that happen no matter what. There's no overtime involved. There might be some bonuses, but these are fixed costs, such as rent, such as insurance. Now, again, insurance has got variability to it, maybe year to year based upon different costs, but you have a basic sense for what is a fixed cost. When I take a look at variable costs can change all the time. Now, I mentioned bonuses. Well, bonuses is a different way of looking at maybe a commission. They're variable aspects. As a salary paid employee, you have a base salary. You have an opportunity to potentially make a bonus, but that's predicated on achieving certain results. From a commission standpoint, if you have a sales team, certainly they're going to make commissions based upon what they sell. So when we take a look at the direct wages, again, what I've mentioned here, fixed costs for salaries is one aspect. Direct wages can, again, go up and down based upon overtime, based upon the busyness of the business. And then supplies that are necessary, those can be all over the board. When we understand how variable costs can impact your cash position, that's something that we build in the liquidity model. Now, in the liquidity model that we've covered under cash flow, we often put together some reserves. Keep in mind that changes are going to take place. So having the variable costs is something that you can plan for to an extent, but there are going to be changes. Variable is the key word here. So if we have some positions in our reserves that will help us with our cash. As we look down as the breakdown of how we're looking at this dollars to percentages of spend, and we're going to dig into that a lot. And as we look at planning for growth, we want to be able to shift those costs up and down based upon the slowdowns in the business. There's a simple chart that kind of helps us walk through fixed costs versus variable costs. And again, this is a very simple, these is not all inclusive. These are just some major items that would affect your preparing a budget, the essential items that you need. So again, we've talked about rent and insurance and salary, but you also have some other things that might be standardized loan payments for a fleet that you have or other equipment that you've purchased. Subscriptions, IT, if you're using a Microsoft product or you're using some other product that is a CRM tool that you have, or just your basic ERP system, those are going to be fixed costs. And other fixed costs that might be SG&A. You have a normalized fixed cost that you have for a retainer that you have for an attorney at your company. It's a fixed set charge. Under variable costs, direct wages, supplies, commissions, fleet repairs, that can be variable. An engine blows and you got to repair it. Incentives for your organization and marketing spend. And what I've broken down here is that oftentimes, now again, everything is different for every company. But when I take a look at fixed cost versus variable cost, we want to try to keep in mind that if fixed costs are something that we can plan on, the variable costs are going to be less than that. So if we're planning and budgeting appropriately, we'll be able to meet the need. So allocating expenses. So across each department, it's important that we kind of take a look at what funds are necessary for the growth goals, prioritizing what we need to grow. We want to be able to meet the needs by the department. So the department head should align their budget with the metrics that are necessary for the company to perform. So every department within your organization should have a say on what's going on in the budget. If it's a top-down budget, then there's really no essential planning that's gone into that. We need to have all people involved. We need to set a small percentage aside for some emergencies. Like we just talked about, we want to have some excess because variable costs they can go up for no reason other than something happened, we gained a new customer, and we need to go buy something to service that customer need. So we need to have an emergency fund built in. We want to be able to encourage cross-functional working in collaboration as we plan. So having departments work together, talking about what they need is important. We want to meet with the sales team and some customers. Salespeople oftentimes can tell us what they're feeling. So if we think about building a budget from the bottom up, we start with what our salespeople are feeling for the next coming year. Now, a salesperson can either give you a really high number or a really low number. And so what we need to do is pressure test it. Why do you feel it? And we're going to talk about the five whys later in different presentations, but the five whys always come into place. Asking the question, why do you feel that? Why do you think that's going to happen? Why are you looking at it from that perspective? These are just different questions that we can ask to get a real number from our salesperson. In addition, talking to our customers, talking to selective customers that can give us an insight what next year looks like for them can give us a really good understanding of what revenue will look like. And then we want to be able to adjust those allocations quarter to quarter. You're not going to just flatline everything. Every quarter is going to have a different revenue number. And if we think about it from a percentage of revenue to whatever the item is, that's going to go up and down as the year is progressing. So the first quarter might be a really high growth year, and you've got some big expenses that from a percentage to your revenue are in line. But if revenue drops in half in the second quarter, well, now you've got to cut your costs down so that your percentages to the revenue stay aligned. Everything we're talking about here is really about planning. It's about looking at it. It's about talking to people. It's about communication. You don't put together a budget sitting in a room by yourself. Oftentimes, companies will sit down with just the key C-suite people or leaders of the organizations or owners, and they forget to involve people that are actually doing the day-to-day business. So include those people, include your customers, use the data that's available to you to make good decisions. As we think about planning and emergency funds, we want to set aside that reserve. We talked about that, or I've mentioned that here a couple of times in this lesson. And when you go through the cost, when you go through cash flow, if you haven't already, you'll see this. Cash reserves are important because there are going to be things that are going to happen. Doesn't matter what kind of company you are, there's always surprises. We want to build a buffer for those revenue shortfalls. And revenue recognition is key here. Every company does it a little bit different. If you're selling a widget, when do you recognize that revenue? Do you recognize it when you make the sale, or do you recognize when the customer pays you? If you're in a service business, do you recognize the revenue when the customer signs the contract, or when you deliver it, or when you pick it up? Revenue recognition can vary from company to company. You want to build in that contingency line for the departments, extra supplies. A department manager, when you're going through it, and if you're a department manager now, you know that you're going to talk to your boss and he's going to ask you, or she's going to ask you different information, how you need and what you need for your budget. Well, you need to be efficient, but you also need to make sure there's some extra contingency in there. Using risk assessment is going to be absolutely imperative. So when we think about our fleet and our technology and repairs that need to happen, there are things that are going to happen within the organization. That's why having historical information will allow us to be more able to plan efficiently as we take a look at it. And we want to review with the leadership on what contingencies are out there. Takeaways today. What we want to do is we certainly want to build that structured budget using core financial elements. And what I mean by that is you've got all your results from prior year. You've got those results broken down by quarter, by month. Take a look at that and lay them out so that you can take a look month over month comparative, year over year comparative, and taking a look at the different functions and the different cost centers within that budget. We want to prioritize the expenses based upon the impact and what is necessary. So when we're trying to build a budget, we want to get everything, but we need to prioritize what's important to run the business effectively. We want to balance the investment into the organization. So if we're trying to grow, we need to be able to control those costs. So again, the percentage of sales, how revenue is going up, if we're in a growth quarter or if we're not, managing those costs will be important. And lastly, we want to include a contingent plan that's going to help us so that we don't run into a problem. So these are the basic elements that are important as we look at building this budget. Talked about the essential aspects of building the budget. There's so many things that come into play here, but laying this out in an efficient way and communicating with your internal customer, meaning your employees, your external customer, the clients that you have, getting the data that you have available to you to look at overriding information that tells us about month over month, year over year, and that the different expenses that took place to achieve the revenue that you are growing by. So I hope this has been beneficial for you. We'll see you on lesson 3 shortly.